What is the movie's relationship to death? Because that is usually a pretty good way of working out what your tone is. I mean, realism is always in inverted commas in a movie, right? Like, it's about where you stake your claim to reality. Like that kind of is that's how you would maybe define tone is what is this? The dark way that I tend to define tone, but that I think is true, is what is the movie's relationship to death? Because that is usually a pretty good way of working out what your tone is. And this movie is more comedic because even the sequences where death is in the room, for example, the first shootout where there's actual, live ammunition being used and all of that kind of stuff, even then there is still a lightness to the scene, right? So there's a funness to the scene. So I think that is a good example of how relationship to death is how you kind of find the concept of your tone, even if you never define it on set, but what about where the movie lives. Dave wanted to do a few things. He definitely, stunts were a huge part of this, and a certain level of autobiography, and I really loved that idea. The idea of trying to smuggle a small human story into a big Trojan horse of explosions and stunts felt exciting to me. I always try and Trojan horse something into the bigger movies I do, and like humanity and a love story and a blue collar nobility, those felt like really interesting things to try and get on a big screen.
And it's not always easy.
Give it some.
I can't complain. I'm working with my dream girl on my dream job.
We gotta switch the pick points to the front.
I'm living the dream.
Wants to go again.
Copy that, Cole. We'll flip the rig. You'll be falling back.
I was working with Robert Downey Jr. on Iron Man 3, and we wanted there to be an element of revenge as his engine against the Mandarin, because Happy Hogan, his best friend and his confidant, has been injured. But Shane and I very much wanted it to be Happy Hogan was killed, like at the end of Act 1. And so that was a real like power movie. And that's a very Shane kind of instinct as well. He's very hard-boiled, and it made a lot of sense. I remember being in the room with Robert Downey Jr. and he was like making a face, and he was like, I don't think he should die. And he could tell that Shane and I were like kind of giving each other a bit of a side eye in a kind of like, oh, he's being a wimp about this. And then Downey said something that I thought was so interesting that I've never forgotten. It's very simple, but like, he was like, here's what you have to remember. I have to spend the next hour and a half of screen time being charming or funny or angry or in action, but a lot of the time telling jokes. He was like, if you are really asking me to authentically play the death of my best friend for an hour and a half of an Iron Man movie, it's going to be a very different movie. And he was like, and I don't think that's the right move. And I'd never really thought about it like that before. It was like the first time when like a brilliant actor pointed out to me, well, you're not the one that has to play it. And it's kind of a classic adage, really, isn't it? It's like, to a degree, it's like Carrie Fisher on the set of Star Wars, or Harrison Ford. I can't remember which one of them it was that said it. They turned around to George Lucas and said, George, you can write it, but you cannot say it, But I think it's bigger than that. It's more holistic, right? It's less about dialogue, and it's much more about the entire movie and what you're trying to do. One of the great things going into The Fall Guy, as we kind of like, honed it in, it was like, I said to Dave, like, let's play the hits. Let's make this like a fist pump of a movie in the theater. And if that's what we're trying to do, then that gives us, again, a kind of like a notion of where the movie sits tonally with each of those decisions. And so I would say, it's funny if you run through, like, dramas tend to have a real or melodramatic relationship to death, right? Like, you know, whereas again, you can almost tell the difference between superhero movies by their relationship to death, right?
Mhm.
By death, how death is treated physically, i.e., is it thrown away? Are we supposed to think of it as somewhat meaningless? Or is every death in a movie filled with meaning? You know, and the genre dictates that somewhat as well. You know, if you are making John Wick, you cannot ask me to care about the death of every one of those 250 people because, and honestly, do I really want my snake brain going, Jesus Christ, he killed 250 people? That doesn't seem particularly heroic. Was there not another solution? You know, and so that's the whole thing. Like, movies are movies. And so you make decisions about what that, you know, how your story relates to how you want to feel about tragedy.